Emma Mitchell tapped her manicured fingernails against the polished conference table, her eyes fixed on the quarterly reports. The numbers were good, better than good, yet she felt nothing but the familiar hunger for more. At 33, she had built Horizon Enterprises from a small startup into one of the most promising tech companies in the industry. Success was her addiction, and the boardroom was her domain. The acquisition of Spark Solutions will be finalized by end of day, her assistant Thomas informed her, sliding a folder across the table. Their team will be here tomorrow for the first integration meeting. Emma nodded, opening the folder to review the details once more. Spark was smaller but had innovative technology that would give Horizon a competitive edge. It was a smart business move, nothing more. Their founder insists on staying involved. James Carter. He's quite particular about his company's direction, Thomas added hesitantly. They all are until they see the check clear. Emma replied with a hint of amusement. Don't worry, I can handle another man who thinks too highly of himself. The next morning, Emma dressed with particular care, choosing a perfectly tailored navy suit that emphasized both her authority and the curves she kept professionally hidden. First impressions mattered in acquisitions. She needed to establish control immediately. The Spark team filed into the conference room at exactly 9. Emma scanned the group, quickly identifying James Carter. Unlike the others who wore expressions of nervous anticipation, he carried himself with quiet confidence. Tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair touched by silver at the temples, he met her gaze directly when she entered. No traces of intimidation. Interesting. Welcome to Horizon, Emma began, her voice smooth and practiced. We're excited to bring Spark's innovation into our family. I've reviewed your products, your team structure, and your development roadmap. While there's impressive work here, there will be changes necessary to align with Horizon's objectives. She waited for the usual nods of agreement. Instead, James leaned forward slightly. And what exactly are those objectives, Ms. Mitchell? Quarterly profits at the expense of long-term vision? His voice was deep, his tone respectful but challenging. The room went silent. Emma felt a strange flutter in her chest, surprise mixed with something else. It had been years since anyone had openly challenged her in her own boardroom. Mr. Carter, Horizon's 5-year growth record speaks for itself, she replied coolly. Our objectives include sustainable expansion and innovation, but also profitability, something Spark has struggled with, if I recall correctly. James smiled slightly, unruffled by her pointed remark. Profitability was always secondary to developing technology that actually improves lives. But perhaps that's why you acquired us, to remember what innovation without compromise looks like. Their eyes locked across the table. The tension between them was palpable, electric. Emma felt a warmth spreading through her body that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Let's move on to integration timelines, she said, breaking the moment. For the next 2 hours, they discussed logistics, team structures, and product roadmaps. While the other executives nodded eagerly at her proposals, James questioned everything thoughtfully. His suggestions were insightful, frustratingly so. Emma found herself both irritated and stimulated by the mental challenge he presented. As the meeting concluded, James lingered while the others filed out. He approached her with a data tablet in hand. You might want to look at these projections before you dismantle our current project, he said, standing close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and earthy. I don't dismantle projects, Mr. Carter. I optimize them, Emma replied, taking the tablet. Their fingers brushed momentarily, sending an unexpected jolt through her. Call me James, he said, his eyes meeting hers again. I suspect we'll be seeing a lot of each other in the coming months. Is that a threat or a promise? Emma asked before she could stop herself. James's mouth curved into a half-smile. I guess that depends on whether you actually read those projections. Emma, the way he said her name, like he was tasting it, made her body respond in ways she hadn't experienced in years. As he walked away, Emma watched him go, annoyed at herself for noticing how well his suit fit across his shoulders. 2 weeks after the acquisition, Emma found herself spending more time with James than she had planned. The board had insisted on keeping him as Chief Innovation Officer, a decision that both annoyed and secretly pleased her. Today they sat across from each other in her office, reviewing the integration of their teams. Your marketing plan lacks vision, James said, pointing to her proposal. You're focusing on corporate clients when our technology could reach a much broader market. Emma leaned back in her chair, studying him. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms. She caught herself wondering how those arms would feel around her and quickly pushed the thought away. Corporate clients pay more, she replied simply, and they're less fickle than regular consumers. But they don't inspire loyalty. People stick with products that improve their lives, not just their profit margins. James stood up and walked to the window. That's why Spark users love us, even though we're small. Emma watched him, noticing how the late afternoon sun highlighted his profile. Love doesn't pay the bills, James. He turned to face her, his expression serious. When was the last time you created something just because it mattered, not because it made money? The question caught her off guard. Before she could answer, her assistant knocked and entered. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a storm warning. They're recommending people leave early before it hits. Emma glanced at her watch. We're not finished here. We can continue tomorrow, James suggested, gathering his papers. Emma wanted to object but realized she'd been at the office since 6 that morning. Fine, let's go. By the time they reached the lobby, rain was pouring down. The street was jammed with cars as everyone tried to leave at once. I'll call my driver, Emma said, reaching for her phone. Good luck with that, James replied, pointing to the traffic. Even your famous efficiency won't beat this storm. As if to prove his point, lightning flashed, followed by a boom of thunder. We could share a cab, he suggested. I live in Riverside Heights. You're in the Tower District, right? Emma nodded, surprised he knew where she lived. It's on the way, he added, as if reading her thoughts. 20 minutes later, they sat in the back seat of a taxi, crawling through traffic as rain pounded the roof. The small space made Emma acutely aware of James, his cologne mixed with the scent of rain coming through the cracked window. Their shoulders touched whenever the cab turned. You never answered my question, James said quietly. Which one? When was the last time you did something just because it mattered? Emma stared out the window. Horizon mattered, when I started it. And now? She turned to face him. Now it's successful, that was the point. Was it? His eyes searched hers in the dim light. The cab hit a pothole, jolting them. Emma's hand landed on James's thigh to steady herself. His muscle tensed under her touch. Neither moved. Success is what matters in business, she said, but didn't remove her hand. Is that enough? James asked, his voice lower. Emma suddenly felt the weight of her lonely penthouse waiting for her, the empty bed, the quiet that came after years of putting work first. It has to be. James slowly placed his hand over hers. His palm was warm, his touch gentle but firm. It doesn't. The cab stopped abruptly, breaking the moment. Tower District. This is as close as I can get with this traffic, the driver announced. Emma quickly pulled her hand away and reached for her purse. This should cover both fares, she told the driver, avoiding James's eyes. Emma. James started. I'll see you tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp. We need to finish the marketing plan. She stepped out into the rain before he could respond. That night, Emma stood by her penthouse window, watching lightning illuminate the city. She hadn't bothered to turn on the lights. Her clothes from earlier still lay on the bathroom floor, where she'd dropped them after a hot shower that did nothing to calm her thoughts. Her phone lit up with an email notification from James. The subject line read, Alternative Marketing Approach. Emma opened it, expecting business talk, but found only one line of text. Some things matter more than success. Good night, Emma. She put down the phone and wrapped her arms around herself, feeling something crack in the walls she built over the years. The storm outside matched the one building inside her, powerful, unpredictable, and impossible to control. The Tech Summit in San Francisco was the industry's most important event of the year. Emma had presented at it 5 times before, but this was the first time she wasn't alone. James stood beside her at the hotel check-in, their suitcases at their feet. Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Carter, we have you in our executive suites on the top floor, the receptionist said with a professional smile. Rooms 1502 and 1504, right next to each other. Emma felt a flutter in her stomach at the thought of James being just a wall away for the next 3 nights. The past month of working together had been a dance of attraction and resistance, every meeting charged with unspoken tension, every accidental touch sending electricity through her body. "Perfect," James said, taking his key card. His fingers brushed against Emma's as he handed hers over. "Dinner at 7 to go over tomorrow's presentation." Emma nodded, keeping her face neutral despite the warmth spreading through her. "My sweet, I'll order room service." Later that evening, Emma changed her outfit 3 times before settling on black pants and a silk blouse. Professional but not too stiff. She was CEO of Horizon Enterprises, not a woman getting ready for a date, even if her racing heart suggested otherwise. James knocked at exactly 7. When she opened the door, he stood there with a bottle of wine. "I thought we might need this," he said with a half smile. For 2 hours they worked on their presentation while eating dinner. The Horizon Spark partnership would be unveiled tomorrow, and everything needed to be perfect. As the night progressed, the wine loosened their usual professional restraint. "You still haven't told me why you started Horizon," James said, leaning back on the couch, his tie loosened, hot button undone. Emma swirled the wine in her glass. "Freedom. My father ran a small business. Worked himself to death only to have the bank take everything when he got sick. I promised myself I'd never be at anyone else's mercy. And now you have power over thousands," James observed. "I provide jobs," Emma corrected, feeling defensive. "Security. At what cost to yourself?" His eyes searched hers. "When was the last time you did something just for you, not for Horizon?" Emma stood up abruptly, walking to the window. "You don't understand what it takes to build something like Horizon." "Maybe not," James said, moving to stand behind her. "But I understand what it costs." Emma could feel his presence, the heat from his body so close to hers. "And what's that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Everything," he said simply. "It takes everything until there's nothing left for yourself." She turned to face him, their bodies inches apart. "Is that what happened to you at Spark?" "Almost." His eyes dropped to her lips. "Until I remembered why I started it." "And why was that?" Emma asked, her heart pounding. "To create something meaningful." His hand slowly rose to her face, thumb gently brushing her cheek. "Something that matters." Emma knew she should step back, maintain the professional boundary. Instead, she leaned into his touch. "James." He kissed her then, softly at first, giving her the chance to pull away. But months of tension had built to this moment, and Emma found herself responding with an intensity that surprised them both. Her hands gripped his shirt, pulling him closer as his arms wrapped around her waist. The kiss deepened, years of Emma's carefully constructed walls crumbling with each passing second. James walked her backward until she felt the wall behind her, his body pressed against hers, solid and warm, as his mouth moved to her neck. "We shouldn't," Emma gasped, even as her hands unbuttoned his shirt. "Tell me to stop," James murmured against her skin, his hands sliding beneath her blouse. But Emma couldn't form the words. Instead, she pulled his face back to hers, kissing him with all the passion she denied herself for years. They moved to the bedroom in a tangle of half-removed clothes and hungry touches. Back at Horizon headquarters, Emma buried herself in work. For 2 weeks, she kept meetings with James brief and surrounded by other executives. When they were forced to be alone, she spoke only of business matters, her eyes never meeting his for more than a second. If he noticed the dark circles under her makeup, or how her hands sometimes trembled when he entered a room, he didn't mention it. The distance she created was working, at least that's what Emma told herself each night as she lay awake, remembering the feel of his hands on her body, the way he'd whispered her name in the darkness of that hotel room. "Ms. Mitchell, there's an emergency meeting called by the board," Thomas announced, interrupting her thoughts. "Global Tech is threatening to pull their contract and move to Patterson Industries." Emma felt her stomach drop. Global Tech was their biggest client, representing nearly 30% of Horizon's revenue. When? Now. They're waiting in the main conference room. When Emma entered, the tension was palpable. Board members sat with grim expressions while James stood by the window, looking surprisingly calm. "Global Tech called this morning," the chairman explained. "Patterson has offered them exclusive access to new technology that outperforms our current system." "That's impossible," Emma said firmly. "Our tech is years ahead of Patterson's." "Not anymore," James interjected, stepping forward. "They've been developing a competing product in secret. My contacts confirmed it yesterday." Emma felt a flare of irritation. And you didn't think to tell me first. His eyes met hers directly for the first time in weeks. I tried, you've been avoiding me. The room fell awkwardly silent. Emma straightened her shoulders, ignoring the knowing looks exchanged by board members. What's your proposal then? We need to show Global Tech what we've been developing in the Spark division, James said. Project Aurora. Emma shook her head immediately. Aurora is at least 6 months from being market ready. But it's exactly what Global Tech needs, and it's better than anything Patterson has, James countered. We can have a working demo by tomorrow. For the next 3 hours, they strategized. Despite her reservations, Emma found herself falling into an easy rhythm with James. His insights complemented her strategic thinking perfectly. When they finally had a plan, the board seemed impressed. You two make quite the team, the chairman commented as the meeting ended. That evening, Emma found herself alone with James in her office, finalizing details for tomorrow's presentation to Global Tech. Your team has done impressive work on Aurora, she admitted, reviewing the specs. I underestimated its potential. You would have seen that weeks ago if you hadn't been so busy avoiding me, James said quietly. Emma looked up sharply. I've been running a company. You've been running away, he corrected, moving around her desk to stand closer. From me. From us. The scent of his cologne made her dizzy with memories. There is no us, James. There's Horizon Enterprises, and there's the fact that I'm your boss. That night in San Francisco wasn't about job titles, he said, his voice low. And you know it. Before Emma could respond, her phone rang, the Global Tech CEO wanting to discuss tomorrow's meeting. James stepped back, giving her space. By the time she finished the call, he had a new proposal ready, his professional mask back in place. They worked late into the night, the pressure of saving their biggest client temporarily overshadowing the tension between them. At midnight, Emma realized they hadn't eaten since lunch and ordered food delivered. As they sat on her office couch sharing Chinese takeout, the familiar comfort between them returned. James made her laugh with stories about his early startup days, and Emma found herself sharing memories she rarely discussed with anyone. The successful Global Tech presentation the next day called for celebration. The entire executive team gathered in the company lounge, champagne flowing freely as they toasted the saved contract. Emma watched from across the room as James charmed a group of managers. He looked up, catching her staring, and raised his glass slightly. The heat in his eyes made her cheeks flush, the memory of their night together suddenly vivid. The morning after the elevator kiss, rumors spread through Horizon like wildfire. Emma arrived to find curious glances and hushed conversations that stopped when she walked by. By noon, her assistant Thomas handed her a printout of an office email chain discussing her romantic entanglement with the former Spark CEO. Emma's hands shook with anger. Everything she had worked for, the respect, the authority, the control, was being undermined. When the board chairman requested an urgent meeting, she knew exactly what it would be about. The board is concerned about the nature of your relationship with James Carter, he said once they were alone. The older man looked uncomfortable but determined. While your personal life is your own business, when it affects company perception. It won't happen again, Emma interrupted coldly. The situation is being handled. That afternoon, she called an executive meeting. James arrived last, his eyes searching hers for some acknowledgement of what had happened between them. Emma kept her face expressionless as she addressed the room. In light of the successful Global Tech contract, we're restructuring some responsibilities, she announced. James Carter will be transitioning from Chief Innovation Officer to head the new Aurora subsidiary. He'll report to Michael Reynolds instead of directly to me. The room went silent. James stared at her, his face showing first confusion, then hurt, and finally a cold anger she had never seen before. That's a demotion, he said quietly. It's a strategic realignment, Emma replied, not meeting his eyes. Your talents are best utilized focusing solely on Aurora's development. After the meeting, James followed her into her office, closing the door behind him. So that's your solution? His voice was controlled but tension radiated from him. Demote me, push me aside because we kissed. Because the entire company is talking about us? Emma snapped. Because everything I've built is at risk because of whatever this is. This, James stepped closer, is the first real thing you've felt in years, and it terrifies you. His words hit too close to the truth. Emma turned away. This conversation is over. The decision has been made. Look at me, Emma, he demanded. When she finally did, the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. I'll take the position, he said. But not because you're right. Because Aurora matters to me, and I won't let you bury a project that could help thousands of people just because you're afraid of your own feelings. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She paced her penthouse, replaying James's words. Was he right? Was she destroying something important, both professionally and personally, because of fear? 3 days later, Emma received an email that made her blood run cold. James had been approached by Patterson Industries, Horizon's biggest competitor, with an offer to buy Aurora outright and install him as their new innovation director. When she confronted him in his new, smaller office, he didn't deny it. They recognize Aurora's potential, he said simply, something you never did. Is this revenge? She asked, hating how her voice betrayed her emotions. For the demotion. James looked tired, the anger from days ago replaced by resignation. Not everything is about you, Emma. This is about creating something that matters. You can't leave, she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. Something flickered in his eyes. Give me one reason to stay. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything Emma couldn't bring herself to say. That's what I thought, James finally said, turning back to his computer. The next morning, the board called an emergency session. Patterson's offer for Aurora had been formally submitted, and James had given his 2-week notice. You need to fix this, Emma, the chairman said bluntly. We can't lose Aurora and Carter to our biggest competitor. Whatever personal issues exist between you, resolve them. That evening, Emma found herself standing outside James' apartment door. She had never been there before, had never crossed that personal boundary. Now, she hesitated only briefly before knocking. I'm afraid, Emma admitted, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. I've never put anything before Horizon. I don't know how. James' expression softened. He took her hands in his, leading her to sit beside him on the couch. You don't have to choose. We can find a way to make both work. How? Emma asked. The board, the employees, the investors, they're all watching us, judging every move. So let them watch, James said. We keep our professional lives professional and our personal lives private. It's not impossible. Emma wanted to believe him. The thought of having both, her company and this man who made her feel alive, was tempting beyond words. I need to know this won't damage what I've built. I can promise to try, James said honestly. That's all anyone can do. She nodded slowly, making her decision. Stay. Don't take Patterson's offer. We'll figure this out together. His answering smile made her heart race. He leaned forward, his lips finding hers in a gentle kiss that quickly deepened. Emma let herself melt into him, all the tension of the past weeks dissolving as his arms wrapped around her. Later that night, tangled in his sheets, Emma felt a peace she hadn't known in years. James traced lazy patterns on her bare back as she rested her head on his chest. Tell me about the real Emma, he murmured into her hair. The one who exists outside of Horizon's boardroom. Emma smiled against his skin. I'm not sure she exists anymore. She does, James said, fingers trailing down her spine. I've seen glimpses of her, when you get excited about a new idea, when you laugh unexpectedly. He rolled her beneath him, his eyes intense in the dim light. When you let yourself feel instead of think. His mouth found the sensitive spot on her neck, and Emma gasped, arching against him. For the second time that night, they lost themselves in each other, business and boundaries forgotten in the heat between them. The next morning, Emma woke early, watching James sleep. Part of her, the CEO part, was already planning how to handle their relationship at work. Another part, one she barely recognized, just wanted to stay in bed with him all day. I can hear you thinking, James murmured, eyes still closed. Emma smiled. We need rules if we're going to do this. He opened one eye. Already back to being the boss. I'm serious, she said, though she couldn't help returning his smile. At work, we maintain professional distance. No special treatment, no public displays. Agreed, James said, pulling her closer. And after hours? Emma traced his jawline with her finger. After hours is just for us. When they walked into Horizon separately that morning, Emma immediately called a board meeting. She announced James would stay as Chief Innovation Officer, reporting directly to her, and Aurora would become Horizon's top development priority. The next few weeks tested their resolve. By day, they maintained their professional relationship, though Emma caught herself staring at his mouth during meetings, remembering how it felt against her skin. By night, they'd explored each other's bodies and minds, learning the people behind the business personas. Then Armstrong Capital, a major potential investor, came to town. The dinner meeting went well until Emma excused herself to the restroom and overheard the investor speaking to his associate. "Mitchell's clearly sleeping with her innovation guy," the man said. "Makes you wonder what other bad decisions she's making." Emma felt like she'd been slapped. When she returned to the table, she was quiet, her mind racing. After dinner, she told James what she'd heard. "Ignore him," James said. "His opinion doesn't matter." "His money does," Emma replied. "Armstrong Capital was going to invest $50 million in Horizon's expansion." "Was?" "He's reconsidering," Emma said flatly. "Because of us." That night, for the first time since they'd begun their relationship, Emma returned to her own penthouse alone. She needed to think, to weigh what mattered most. Every business instinct told her to end things with James, to protect Horizon at all costs. But as she stood looking out at the city lights, Emma realized something had fundamentally changed. For the first time in her adult life, Horizon wasn't the only thing that mattered. Her phone rang, a video call from James. When she answered, he was in his office at Horizon, excitement clear on his face. "You need to see this," he said without preamble. "The Aurora prototype passed all the initial tests. It's working, Emma. Better than we projected." His joy was contagious. Despite her worries, Emma found herself smiling. "That's amazing." 3 months after Emma and James decided to make their relationship work, disaster struck Horizon. A major security breach exposed thousands of client files, sending the company into crisis mode. Emma hadn't slept in 48 hours, directing damage control from the emergency command center they'd set up in the main conference room. "The tech press is crucifying us," Thomas reported, handing her the latest news summaries. "Stock is down 17% since the announcement." Emma rubbed her temples, fighting exhaustion. The board was meeting in an hour to discuss the situation, and she knew some members would use this opportunity to question her leadership. James entered the room, his own face showing fatigue. They had barely seen each other during the crisis, despite working in the same building. "The security team identified the breach point," he said, his voice professional despite the concern in his eyes when he looked at her. "It wasn't random. Someone targeted us specifically." Emma stood to review his findings, swaying slightly as a wave of dizziness hit her. James moved forward instinctively, steadying her with a hand on her arm. "When did you last eat?" he asked quietly. "I don't remember," she admitted. "There hasn't been time." James frowned but said nothing more as they prepared for the board meeting. His silent support gave Emma strength as she faced the angry questions and accusations from board members. "This happened on your watch," Mitchell, Harold Wheeler, the most critical member, stated. "Perhaps your attention has been divided lately." His eyes flicked meaningfully toward James. Before Emma could respond, the room began to spin. She gripped the table, trying to focus, but the lack of food and sleep finally caught up with her. The last thing she heard was James calling her name as darkness closed in. She woke in a hospital bed, an IV in her arm and James asleep in a chair beside her. When she stirred, he immediately opened his eyes. "The doctor says it's exhaustion and dehydration," he said before she could ask. "You collapsed in the boardroom." Emma tried to sit up. "I need to get back. The breach is being handled," James said firmly, pressing her back against the pillows. "By me." "You?" Emma asked, confused. "The board appointed me acting CEO while you recover," he explained. Harold wasn't happy, but the chairman supported it. Fear gripped Emma. "They'll never give the company back if—" "Stop," James interrupted. "This isn't a power play. This is me making sure you don't kill yourself for Horizon. The company will be waiting when you're better." For 3 days, Emma was forced to stay in the hospital while James ran Horizon. He visited each evening, briefing her on developments. The security team had contained the breach, identified the responsible party, and begun rebuilding client trust. James had been handling the press and the board with surprising skill. Why are you doing this? Emma asked on the third night. You could take this opportunity to push me out permanently. The board would probably support you now. James looked at her with such tenderness that Emma felt her chest tighten. Because I love you, he said simply. And because you built something amazing that deserves to be protected, even from your own stubbornness. It was the first time either had spoken of love. Emma felt tears threatening as the walls around her heart finally collapsed completely. I love you too, she whispered, the words unfamiliar but right. 2 weeks later, Emma returned to Horizon. In her absence, James had not only managed the crisis, but implemented new security protocols that impressed even the most critical board members. He had protected her company as if it were his own. When she entered her office for the first time, she found James waiting with the executive team. To her surprise, they applauded her return. Welcome back, CEO Mitchell, James said formally, though his eyes held the warmth only she could read. That evening, as they walked together toward the parking garage, James took her hand. I have a proposal for you. Personal or professional? Emma asked with a smile. Both, he replied. Horizon needs a co-CEO structure, someone to handle innovation and product development while you focus on strategy and growth. Emma stopped walking. Are you suggesting yourself? Who better? James asked. We've proven we work well together, in every way. Emma considered it, the old fear of sharing power battling with the new knowledge that James had protected rather than threatened her position. The board might actually support that now, she said thoughtfully. There's one condition, James added, pulling her closer. No more hiding what we mean to each other. I'm tired of pretending I don't love you every time we walk into that building. 1 month later, at Horizon's annual gala, Emma stood at the podium addressing the company's employees, clients, and investors. She announced the new co-CEO structure to surprised but largely supportive applause. And one more announcement, she added, looking directly at James in the front row. For those who have been speculating about my personal relationship with James Carter, she paused, seeing the surprised expressions throughout the room. You're right. We are together and we're not apologizing for it. Whispers rippled through the crowd as James joined her on stage, taking her hand in full view of everyone. Horizon was built on innovation and taking risks, Emma continued. James taught me that the greatest risk, and the greatest reward, is opening yourself to new possibilities, in business and in life. Later, they stood on the balcony of the venue, champagne in hand, looking out at the city lights. Emma leaned against James's shoulder, feeling a contentment she had never known was possible. Are you worried about what comes next? James asked, his arm around her waist. Emma smiled up at him. For the first time in my life, no. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. As they kissed under the stars, Emma realized the true meaning of success. Not the power she had clutched so tightly all these years, but the courage to let someone in, to build something lasting that went beyond balance sheets and quarterly reports. With James by her side, both Horizon and her heart were stronger than ever.